So good afternoon. This is Anto Buriajo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is a conversation to help us get through the pandemic and try and figure out what's on the other end for commercial buildings. So welcome. Profiles of the panelists are on mondaylive.org. So if you want to see who's actually talking about anything, head over there. Just a reminder that the views being expressed here are those of the individual speakers, not of any organization or company. Please post questions and comments on the Q&A and the chat on the Zoom tool. And if possible, please complete the survey at the end of this hour. So we're going to do things a little bit different today. We've split the hour into 4 15 minutes-ish segments. First one, we're going to talk about big picture, basically news and trends that's impacting that the group has observed. Then we're going to talk about best practices, what we are specifically doing to get through this, and our experiences from that, good and bad. Then we're going to talk a little bit about sort of more future stuff in terms of new business models, new ways that potentially we can do things past the pandemic. And then we want to spend the last 15 minutes with questions and comments from you guys, from guests. So if you feel inclined to chime in, please ping me or just make a comment or a Q&A, a question on the tool, and say that you want to get on, and we'll put you on the stage, and you can speak and make your comments or questions. So that's kind of the format for today. This slide deck has a number of sort of links that various people from the group has actually put in here. This is Ken Sinclair talking about his current issue at Automated Buildings, various interesting links there. Steve Fay, I'm sure he'll be talking about this in the best practice part of today. John Petsey talking about some interesting stats on predictions on IoT. Therese talking about flexible spaces, continuation from last week. And Jim Butler talking about liability, which I'm not quite sure which hole that will fit into our segments. And Roger talking about business preparedness survey related stuff. So with that, I'm going to kill the shares, and let's get going with the first segment, sort of big picture stuff. What are you guys seeing out there, and how it's impacting things that's impacting commercial buildings? Anybody want to start?
I can throw in something. Certainly, talking to a lot of the distributors, resellers here, where they're beginning to kick off, they're actually saying they're really crazy busy at the moment, doing quoting and getting restarted with stuff, almost to the point of where they're overwhelmed with the sudden interest in getting back into the market from where it's been dead. So clearly, there's work to be done amidst all the blacker news around it. It seems like there's at least there's going to be a lot of activity to kick off anyway.
And you're in the UK, just in case people are sure of that. Okay, that's great. Interesting.
I'm seeing the same thing in APAC, Roger. Just in the last week, I've been hit up multiple projects. Got 2 calls tonight. That just seems to be like the doors have been opened. Projects that have been on RFP are suddenly starting to come out.
I'd third that. I was commenting to somebody, they say, "Hey, how's your week going?" I said, "This was the first week that basically felt normal at my desk. Just the level of, activity, stuff just flying, emails, all related to business and projects and, sales type of activity, stuff like that. So I definitely feel a difference. As we talk to our partners, though, we see it's not even. Some are reporting they're crazy busy. But others have been affected. Again, it depends on what segment they're in, I think, So.
Our store clients have been seeing lines at the door, waiting for them to be open. Many of the essential stores that haven't been open, what people are going for, home goods, an amazing response from the industry. But John, to your point, the people who serve that industry are experiencing different things. Some of the stores are going bankrupt, these retail chains. So they're in a free fall right now in that regard. It's very uneven across the board.
So do you guys think that some of this uptick that you're seeing is related to COVID as far as people looking for solutions and things to address COVID as people begin to open up, or has nothing to do with COVID? These are projects that the bigger other pictures, smart building technology or whatever was their motivating factor.
I think the ones we're seeing, Mark, are catch up as opposed to COVID related. They're kind of the projects being reinstigated and trying to catch up where they were.
We've been kind of consistently busy throughout this whole thing on our commercial building stuff. The retail stuff, on the other hand, we're still seeing fallout. And that's restaurants and convenience stores primarily. And we continue to see more of that coming, it looks like. I think what's going on is some of the government relief money is running out for restaurants until they get another package going. So we're seeing landlords starting to take the necessary steps to end leases, for instance. So I think it's going to get a little bit worse here before it gets better, even if there's a little bit more relief that comes. But we'll see.
I know for us, we're seeing sort of a split, roughly about 30%, 35% in and related to COVID to address specific issues. And the rest, Roger, like what you had said, or possibly John and others, that it's more of the catch up or projects that were kind of put on hold and now they've got the go ahead to go.
I think there's a bit of movement in the digital transformation. I'm working on my next articles, and this whole concept of reinventing and renaissance, I think is definitely happening. And but Microsoft has basically, the CEO of Microsoft quoted that he's seen more action in the last 2 months than the last 2 years. So I think the whole IoT, the working online, working remotely, has become socially acceptable. So I think that's kind of driving things, even though they may not be directly related. There's been a big shift. I'm calling it a renaissance, another era that we're moving into, where it's okay to work remote.
I would say security too, that security, we're seeing an uptick of people realizing that they're on old software, that they haven't patched, they haven't really kept up to date. And so probably reiterating what Roger said is people taking stock and realizing how vulnerable they are. And maybe a little bit of Ken in realizing that this is software and they need to get into the modern world where they're at least ready for the next phase. And that means being up to date and being in sync with their IT teams in terms of cybersecurity.
I think basically data and remote communications has just taken on way more value and is way more in the forefront. So actually, I think it's helped everybody on this screen business.
Yeah, the unevenness of how busy people are has been, it looks like it's getting busier over the past few weeks, but it's certainly been a sort of a common thread in the past few weeks that some people are crazy busy and some people are not. And
well, 50% of what you all did was travel. Now you don't travel.
Pretty much.
So it leaves a big hole in a lot of things.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, we're, as a startup, it's hard to measure. We don't have a history to gauge whether, times are good or bad, really. But I think the piece I wanted to add is here, living in Richmond, Virginia, the consumer market, which dominates so much of the business in the States, I've seen a huge shift in the last week in terms of the traffic volume, the number of malls and strip malls and larger malls with cars in them. So more and more of the stores are opening, including restaurants. And that's a good sign, I would think, particularly for those of you who are serving the more of the retail segment, is that people are clearly getting back to normal, which is critical.
Yeah, you can definitely detect an increase in activity. I was just looking at our distribution only sales here month by month through the year. And in May, we returned to January and February levels, which is good news. June is too early to really call. But there is some activity here happening for sure. And I would tend to, I don't know this for a fact, but I would tend to guess that this was primarily related to things reopening and moving forward. Business getting back to business.
So bigger picture, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty still there in terms of whether COVID will return as a second, third wave, those kind of issues. And now we have on top of that, the sort of the social unrest that potentially can do things. Is that going to, how is any of that going to play into our world? Anybody want to chime in on that? I know it's really, really big.
It's, so let me speak from Arizona, if anyone's watching national news or anything. It's been really interesting here in that what we thought was a fairly controlled and intentional regulated reopening seems to have turned into everybody just kind of forgetting there's a pandemic going on. Right. And there's still the measures going on in public in terms of restaurants, you know, spacing tables and so forth. But I happened to go out to eat dinner twice. First two times I've been to a restaurant for dinner this past full, completely full. And if you look at what I kind of have witnessed out there in the wild against the numbers that, you know, the state is reporting, you know, we're trending up. We're running into kind of that last 20% or less of hospital beds available and ventilators available and so forth. So we're definitely trending in the wrong direction. And I heard a local news story talking about a correlation they found with Memorial Day and the timing of all of this. And now they're trying to project that forward to end of school, start of summer, vacations, if there are, you know, kind of vacation season this year, that could actually continue to push those numbers up a little bit. So there are a lot of preemptive activities going on at hospitals and in the health systems here right now.
Texas is the same, Tracy. It just, the moment we opened, seemed like all the rules were thrown out the window. The store employees didn't want to talk, didn't want to be turned into, you know, policing action to patrol. They just will let people in doing what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
We're tracking up to.
Yeah.
So North Carolina, which is where I live, I think that the three states sort of increasing is Texas, Arizona, and North Carolina. We went for a walk this morning to downtown and lots of tourists there starting to come in from out of town. So it's kind of worrying. So I guess the uncertainty sort of period continues for a while until we sort of figure out exactly what stability is.
There's actually one news on New York Times. Businesses want virus legal protection from the government. They're actually trying to pass a law.
Yeah, I saw that. That was in one of the slides. I think John put that up, or somebody did. Interesting. All right, so we're 15 minutes after. Let's sort of move to the next segment, which is best practices. And I think what we're really wanting to extract here are any sort of experiments or stuff that we are doing by way of trying to sort of uncover best practices or worst practices, what's working and what's not working. I don't know who wants to start.
Well, the biggest thing we're seeing is monitoring, air quality monitoring. And this goes across the board. We're doing a lot of work with rooftop units now for retail spaces, anywhere that there's public access, and they want to make sure that the air quality is at least up to whatever the emerging standards will be in anticipation of that. So to Teresa's point, this is now requiring an upgrade of the system so they can communicate. That's what we're seeing as a result of this right now.
What specifically are they monitoring, Leighton?
Volatile organic compounds, CO2. They're making sure that the dampers on the RTUs are working for outside air. I don't think any of us on this call would be shocked at the state of most rooftop units that serve a space, but there seems to be a call to action to get these guys upgraded and working correctly.
Yeah, I fielded 2 calls this week from 2 large REITs who were looking for best practices, what others were doing, and their first focus was indoor air quality sensors and indoor air quality sensor technologies. So I sent them your way, Alpa.
Alpa, you want to talk about your project?
Yeah.
Can you speak up a little or come nearer to the mic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have to turn my audio settings up. This computer does it. All right, so it should be better. We have a partner in Turkey, and they started selling a lot of UAVs, for UAVC lamps within the units, and we bundled up the indoor air quality sensor to verify that if it is removing the particles out of the system, or and we're just gonna basically check if the new system is working or not.
But this is based on the IAQ unit that you showed us a few weeks back, right?
That is correct.
Great traction.
And and we installed one to Michigan as well as a pilot in Michigan to a building owner that attended.
Good to see that.
So what's interesting is the number of guidelines that are out there now, anything from real estate folks to government to businesses or whatever. I got wind of one, I guess towards the end of last week, that New York City real estate leaders issued guidelines for re-entering office buildings. So here is a group of real estate holders, industry leaders within the New York metro area getting together and issuing guidelines of which they are all seem to be going to practice versus, others. And again, I'm sure everybody's doing a mix of things or whatever. And then one other, I don't know if you guys have heard this one, I'm starting to see accreditation programs out there. And have you heard this one? GBAC STAR accreditation program. Basically, it's, let's see, successful GBAC STAR facilities are able to demonstrate that correct work practices, procedures, and systems are in place to prepare, respond, and recover from outbreaks and pandemics. So if you recall, many conversations ago, we brought up the topic of will buildings be rated and have that accreditation like a LEED certification, pandemic certified or whatever. And is this the start of that?
Good point.
Can you post that, Mark? What
Which one? The
the GBAC.
GBA? Yeah.
Yeah.
Put it on this.
Yeah.
Mark, what is the acronym of GBAC?
Off the top of my head, I do not know. You'll see it when I post this.
Isn't it green building?
No, it has nothing to do with green building.
Is it Global Biorisk Advisory Council? Is that it or something else?
Sorry, guys, I have no clue.
All right, let's look that up and post it on the chat, and we can also add it to the.
And I believe there's others that are, obviously folks are working on.
Yeah, I mean, the two, I keep bringing up like how we had Karen on here from the well standard. And so that was, I think it's building, and there's another one that's like building fit, but there was definitely two already that we had talked about. I'm not sure if this is a different one or the same, but the one was affiliated with that Joe Allen from Harvard, and that really has pretty deep USGBC roots, the well standard. And Building Fit looks to have a big New York play for Class A offices in New York. But you're right on the trend, Mark. There's this idea of certification for this is coming on strong.
It's coming on strong, but it's still still sort of fragmented, and I'm not sure when that will sort of congeal into something as TBD.
Some of the stuff I'm seeing on researching my next chapter here is the touchless side of all of this. Just simple things like our touch screens, the one in the mall that used to direct you, or the one at the office door, we're no longer allowed to touch. So that all needs to be converted to voice. That's an interesting transition. The same thing with elevators, anything we touch. Even our thermostats are probably going to fall. We've all avoided voice because we found it annoying, but if given the options of touching or voice, I think we will probably succumb to that. Another innovation thing that caught my attention is they're actually working on a voice print for the COVID cough, which I thought was extremely interesting. Apparently when you cough with this disease, it has a unique voice print. And I know the last time I had a credit break on my card, when I was finished getting it all straightened out, she asked if she could take a voice print, my voice print. And I said, well, yeah, what's that? And she said, well, the next time you call, I have your voice print and I can match it to your voice. She said, that's not the only credential, but that'll be one of the credentials we will use. So this is a whole technology kind of evolving there that might fall on us.
Privacy issues.
Forget it.
But the question I have with touch is, I think obviously it makes sense. However, didn't the World Health Organization or the GDC come out and it was back and forth whether or not touch was part of the spread or not part of the spread, or, it's obviously still all confusing and everything else. If the GDC or some organization like that comes out and says, well, touch is there, but it's not as an important conductor as once thought, will touch take off in our buildings?
I think that it has probably more ramifications on the cleaning side of it. If you say that touch isn't an issue, I mean, that's where all the big bucks are being spent right now for restaurants and stuff, is cleaning after every person, cleaning after everybody walks through a door. And we certainly are treating it as if it's a problem now. So that's a bigger question. I think if you can basically remove the concern of touch, then it says we don't have to take such measures for cleaning.
A lot of questions there.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's if people cough or sneezing over things, all the droplets in the air are settling on something, but it's just generally keeping things clean from that point of view.
So other sort of areas of best practice, Steve, I know you've been working on this sort of risk assessment for basically contractors. Any updates on that front?
A little bit. We met with the REIT last week and gave them a detailed. They're definitely seeing this as a way to have good controls over who comes in and out of the building and what health they're in. I think it's not, we've test marketed it across a number of different channels, and I would say including the group that I'm looking at right here. And I've, you guys have never responded like, wow, that's great, go do that. that's been more of the reaction, even though it's been a low-cost tool to use. I'm not seeing the people saying, wow, let's go do this. It's I mean, clearly it's practical, but there has not been a groundswell support for it so far. So, yeah.
Jim Lee or Jim Butler, I know that you guys are working on from the cybersecurity part of this, which is a little bit different angle. You want to comment on any of that?
I think we've got two initiatives going on. One is in our traditional analytics business. We've generated a white paper, and we've been consulting with our clients who are very, very large owners, primarily looking at air changes and meeting the ASHRAE recommendations. Jim Butler can comment on some of the things we put. Jim?
Yeah, so there's still a lot of debate about to what extent HVAC systems are complicit in spreading the pathogens. And we've done some analysis of various things that building owners could do if they're concerned about this, and the energy impacts of, for example, opening up your outside air dampers are pretty severe, not to mention the fact that we're getting into the summer season when your HVAC system might not have the capacity to handle all that. But we found that filtration and things like UVC have the best performance to energy consumption ratio of things that we've analyzed so far. Jim, you want to talk about the cybersecurity stuff?
Sure. We've been working on cybersecurity for about the last 15 years, but with the release of BACnet Secure Connect in the fall, that's become a hot topic. And how that's going to, how security as a topic is going to interface with the pandemic and the future is not really clear. But it's definitely a hot topic, and it's definitely moving forward quickly with lots of companies, lots of OEMs working on security solutions right now, primarily for BACnet SC.
Presumably, a lot of that is related to the increased remote access, or has that come up in your discussion? Or
it has come up, but the wave of demand for security was already going very strong before COVID hit. So I think that that's been a 10% effect. I think it's there's a lot of momentum behind the wave right now.
Okay.
By the way, I thought your paper was well done that you guys put together. Kind of summarizing that. If everyone hasn't read that, or maybe you can post it. I don't know if you.
We'll post it.
Yeah, it was a good concise summary.
Thank you.
Any other sort of things, Scott? What are you seeing in your facility management sort of clients and people you're talking with?
Well, specifically to Leighton's point on the rooftop units, because we have a lot of retail and quick serve restaurants, they mostly have rooftop units. We're seeing a significant uptick in preventative maintenance schedules. So prior to COVID, didn't really have a preventative maintenance schedule set up on their rooftop units, and now they're being more adamant about having those set up, especially from a filter change perspective.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, which is, where is this leading? I mean, with respect to the business model side of it, we've talked about the bigger picture. We've talked about specific things that we're doing that's working on our. Where is this going in terms of potential new business models or new ways of thinking about things down the road after the pandemic?
I saw an interesting new business model. It doesn't have much to do with HVAC, but I thought it was interesting. So, you know, at big healthcare facilities, hospitals, stuff like that, you know, the food services are typically outsourced. One of the big companies is Aramark that does that work, right? They're taking space and turning it into small grocery stores for the people who work in the hospital, because they've got the food. They're not cooking as many meals. there's some space, and now the nurses and doctors don't have to make a separate trip to a grocery store. Essential Groceries, they're actually standing up grocery stores.
That's fantastic idea.
Isn't that an interesting idea? I just saw that. Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting.
It is.
That kind of relates to the repurposing stuff that we talked about.
It does from last week. Here's a more, I would say last week we were talking about the theory and beginning evidence of repurposing. Will empty strip malls turn into office spaces so people don't have to go to the city? And it makes sense, and it'll probably happen. This is actually an announcement about what they're doing, but they're focusing on the healthcare facilities, which I thought was interesting. It makes sense, right? Why make, doctors and nurses have to take a trip, especially cities, or it may be difficult. So that was pretty interesting.
Just a reminder to the attendees out there, if you want to chime in and join us in this conversation, just post a message saying so on the chat or on the Q&A, and we'll bring you in, that you speak. So on future business model, any other thoughts?
One of the things that
Go ahead.
One of the things that we've done, I may have mentioned it before in here, we have a number of Asian vendor relationships and reps, sales reps and so forth. And one of our sales rep pulled together a set of vendors for PPE material. And we decided that our best use of those connections would be to pass that on to the HVAC community, try to help get people back to work. So kind of repurposing vendors as opposed to a building per se, but we're doing that at cost. It's not a moneymaker or anything for us, but it's one way to try to help, from a best practice standpoint, getting people back to work. And by the way, it's picking up. That business is picking up, I think, as people are starting to.
Yeah, I was wondering, because you mentioned this a couple of weeks back, and
yeah.
How it's going.
We just introduced it, and now we just did our first kind of big order because we collected up a bunch of orders from people, which the thing I was worried about, there are so many different businesses doing this now, and Amazon has been active in recruiting vendors and so forth. So we didn't think we would ever be price competitive, but apparently we are, given what the market is saying and doing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Again, of course, that's at cost. So it's not a business model, but
not a good business model.
No, but there is
yes, yeah,
alternative motive there, right? I want to get people back working and get our customers back working. So that was just one way we thought we could pitch in a little bit.
Okay.
Kind of interesting that all of these things we're doing keeps bringing everything closer, and also basically takes a strong shot at travel. So that's kind of an interesting trend that I'm seeing, is the value of close community is greatly increasing. And I think you're going to see significant rebuilding. And I think in the mega cities, what you're going to see is the cities dividing themselves into small cells, where the close community will be kind of recreated, and people will be like a city within a city. The Tokyo model is a bit that way, as it's 19 million, but it's like 19 million cities of 1 million kind of thing. So that, I think you're going to see that kind of thinking. That kind of thinking will be a lot of repurposing of buildings, which should be good for our industry.
That reminds me of what Alper kept bringing up, though I didn't totally get it, but he's, as usual, Alper a couple weeks ahead with his diagram from Turkey of what a city should be, right, Alper?
Yeah, it looks like the Venus project that came out years later from another person. It's basically a circular shape, and the whole villagers live there, school is in there, it's sustainable. Everything is in one place. So that was the idea of the ideal village that would be created. It actually pushed down because of the political Cold War, and they said it's a communist thing to do, and it didn't really happen much. But if it had happened, it would have been a lot more sustainable in Turkey. There's only like 4 or 5 of them over sustainable goals.
in general, is that concept really new? I don't think so. Look at Dubai. Masdar was a project like that over many years ago.
That was drawn in 1930.
Yeah. I mean, I always think I lived those years in Paris, and in every direction of Paris, they have what they call Nouvelle Villes. They never worked. That they tried to create a new city because Paris was getting so crowded, and west, north, east, south. They tried to create these new places, but so far maybe this is going to be the time that changes it, and that people like to live in these other places.
Maybe the big difference is that we've been talking about, everything from Dubai to what Alp is talking about, has been planned cities, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you need so many shops per, so many schools per population. But what we're seeing now is potentially the people and the society itself is actually redoing existing, or sort of restructuring existing cities into a different area. So it's not planned, it's actually grassroots. So maybe that's a big difference that will make it more relevant.
I was back to the business models for today. Somebody I really like to follow is Fred Gordy. I don't know who that is. And Fred Gordy came out this week, which I thought was a really good post. And he said, in terms of OT technology, 100% of the times when he goes into a building, and probably he's called in because he's the cybersecurity expert for intelligent buildings, maybe when there is a problem or when they're foreseeing a problem, when they're getting active about cybersecurity. But the money quote from me from that article was 100% of the time when he goes in, it's operational technology devices all over the place that people don't know about and that haven't been updated.
But is that a surprise?
It seems like a big business model would be doing exactly what he said in the title, is know what you have and get a plan in place for how to bring it up to date.
Steve Fay, isn't that your business?
Sounds like a good idea. Anybody want to do so? Join me.
Sign me up.
Got this little company that's always looking for investors. Just let me know.
I know a company could do that. Yeah. And it was one
Yeah.
other
So
thing
speaking of business models, so we're really trying to, as you know, trying to play IT principles to the OT market. From a business model standpoint, where that shows up is we're selling software on a subscription license basis, which is as opposed to shrink wrap, right? So, but then more importantly, I think to this industry is we're using this we're really educating our partners, the contractors, the SIs, on how to put together a managed service agreement. They all want to be in the have maintenance agreements, but they're really terrible at it. And cyber lends itself to that, because if you don't do it on an ongoing basis, you're going to lose your security. So it's a natural to help them sell a service agreement. And what is pulling through is like the software agreements like Niagara has. You can build it right into the overall quote, or any other vendor who has software that comes out with updates. Just build that into the agreement, because that's one of the key attributes of a good cyber security strategy, is to have your software and the control system maintained. But the conversation around how to do this, but it's not just software, hardware. We're encouraging the network vendors to sell their equipment on a managed service basis. Don't give me hardware prices. Give me a monthly price for your gear and your cloud component, and let me bundle that into a full monthly service, so that, again, it provides a much stickier solution for the industry.
So we've kind of touched on this a couple of times previously in previous weeks. Can we, any other sort of experiences in that? Any other people talking around in those areas? Because I certainly have, in what I'm doing in Paddy, is all based on the recurring revenue model, and I know that it's not one that's necessarily common in buildings.
Yeah,
I'm actually working, well, me and Linkspring, we're actually working on one a couple different variations of a complete as a service, where it includes what, like you were saying, Steve, the hardware, the maintenance upgrades, the cybersecurity, the analytics, everything basically at the end of the day is as a service model. And I think we are probably 90% there as far as the models that we have created. And I personally believe in the next 3 to 5 years, especially for larger multi-site opportunities, that is going to be the way to go. And all of us in this industry will be asked, well, beside the hardware thing, your traditional way, do you have an as a service model?
I think the closer you get to the end user or the occupier, the more that's acceptable. It's the traditional chain through the contracting, which is the issue. But if you get closer to the endpoint with the customer or the occupier or something, they're used to, paying annual subscriptions, whether it's for security or anything else, software they use through the OT.
Yeah.
The IT side.
Roger, yeah, 100% right. We're finding that the route to that customer for platform as a service or software as a service is different, right? If you're trying to go through, you get closer to that customer quicker is the challenge.
I think when rolling it into a subscription model, though, is a good way to do that. And because of COVID, and the other thing that's happening is the clients, the owners, or the people owning the companies, they're basically struggling with this problem that they now have 3 identities. They have the office, they have the home, and the evolving in between. And the in between is like the local community or close community. And so now I'm seeing that as you start to take your wares and put them into subscription models, we may see a complete shift that we are no longer selling to the building owner. We're actually selling to the large companies.
So can I make a comment on that? I actually had a conversation along these lines, but I think there's a separation between the financial model and the technology architecture model. So here's the example. Install CO2 sensors, occupancy sensors, primarily driven out of, some way to help manage risk in COVID, right? Both of the systems were going to be, the sensors in the buildings only could be communicated with via the cloud. So my concern about that is I've got nice new, brand new CO2 air quality sensors in the building. Can I base my control decisions on them when the only way I get the data is up through the cloud over a connection like Tracy's that keeps freezing up and maybe goes offline and I don't open the dampers? So it's kind of like a subscription architecture to me is different than a financial subscription model. I'm, as you can tell, personally not a believer that active components that are involved in controls shouldn't be able to be communicated with where they are. So.
Yeah. On that note, I think we really need to increase the amount of edge devices that are out there. And when we increase the number of devices, then it falls into provisioning. Like these big enterprises, most of them use Microsoft, and they have IT departments that they test upgrades, they roll them individually, piece by piece, to make sure that the systems are working correctly. Those technologies, the provisioning technologies, needs to get into the edge, and I think the dealers that we work with would do those services along with the technology, especially the device that we created. They will need upgrades eventually.
But I think, John, I couldn't agree more that, again, more is being done right locally at that device level. And, as the technology has evolved, and especially the computing power and the drop in cost and what you're able to do with hardware as well as software and firmware, it is, I know we're seeing it, and obviously we've got a strategy for it, but more and more folks that I talk to, oh yeah, I get it. You can do that at the device level. Absolutely. Well, what about the cloud? We're not saying you do everything at that device level. The cloud does play an integral part, but not everything has to go to the cloud.
Even if it goes there, it can't be limited to only being accessible there, at least.
Right,
not,
exactly.
in my opinion.
Right.
I think most of us would agree with that, and I think most of us would agree with that. I think it's really down to the services, or if you've got a product that constantly should or needs to be updated, a Microsoft 365, you want to keep that updated, then we'll do that for you. Or it's the services behind what your offer is that tend to lend themselves more to SaaS.
So just a reminder out there for attendees to post your questions. We haven't seen any questions. You're obviously enthralled with the conversation here, which is wonderful. It's not a bad thing at all. So we'll just continue on this subject, but please do chime in with some questions or comments.
Yeah, what I was going to throw in was I kind of on the slide ago when there was we talk about the market a lot and a lot of the other things, but there's always a little bit of inward looking we have to look at as well. And the biggest thing that's probably going to be affected by this is our sales side. And what I actually put on there was a survey done by Freshwater on what changes might need, both from good and bad, which is why I quite liked it, from our own sales teams or people that need to actually now engage with the customer, because they're saying, hey, the decision makers getting harder to get at, but we can do more, and we can certainly keep our admin more up to date and do things like that, even though some of the market things are wrong. And I think it's important we look inwards to see how we're going to change, as well as the way the market's going to change too.
Yeah, I think somebody made the comment earlier along those lines that it's not the ultimate user, it's the channel and us that maybe we're getting in the way of new ways.
It's the back office, I think. Everything that you're saying. I remember going to a Microsoft IoT meeting, and there was a company there in access control that had moved to a cloud model, and he said the pain is in your operations. The pain is in your changing your whole business around to that subscription model.
Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody in the IT space that was going through the same process of moving from a perpetual license with software into a recurring revenue. Yeah. And the comment that he made was nothing really changed until they changed the compensation model. Mm-hmm. Right? That whole thing of tell me how somebody gets paid, you can predict their behavior.
Well, that was my point about the system integrator channel. That's what I worry about in this model, is they haven't really worked out what's their play in this. How do they, and if your story is a few pennies per month, or if your story is, no offense, but you got to repair some hardware that's in the field, that's not very attractive to most system integrator channels.
I think a problem might be too is there's so much unknown that the risk for somebody to finance the subscription model may be a problem, maybe a dilemma. Although several years ago you could lay down the economics. The trouble is when you try to predict what's going to happen in 2 years to even your client, everything's a variable. It's having trouble with that.
But that's mainly when we talk about hardware. I mean, software, from the software side, is not as acute.
I wasn't thinking about our systems. I was thinking about the financial model of it. The fact that you're trying to sell this to either a building owner or to the company, and you basically have to make an investment in products to put into the building, and you may have trouble getting financing, which you wouldn't have in the past, but because just of the uncertainty of our present future.
Don't forget it affects the revenue. Instead of getting 100,000 for doing a project to get him paid, you're spreading that across a larger period of time. So your kind of revenue stream is not as good as it was. So it's a challenge for some of the smaller companies to move across. Some of the bigger companies might be able to swallow it.
It's having been through that switch from CapEx to OpEx. It's a step function change in how you manage your finances, for sure. And you have to plan and go into that. You know, we finance through third parties a lot of our stuff. But I've had some other business owners that I do work with that have gone through that. Even for just software stuff, it's different when you're used to collecting a larger lump sum up front versus spreading it out. You really got to look at the cash flow part of it very carefully. And there's just this built-in dip that you can't avoid, and you have to be able to span that.
Mm-hmm.
Which again amplifies it for the system integrator, right?
Yeah, you know, the one thing that we've seen, a number of our system integrator customers have really kind of evolved maintenance agreements, when realistically, if you looked at them, they're kind of like managed services agreements. And now they happen to include, you know, components that include connectivity to devices and some things like that. Even my home system here, I'm paying a recurring fee, and that includes, you know, the filter changes and support and warranty, and they come out and kind of check on the system functionality, and if I have a problem with the thermostat that's not communicating, they can help with that. So
some rethinking of the whole business, both from a technology and from a business and from a delivery channel perspective, is needed.
Do you think that this whole moving to the software as a service model, acceptance of cloud, is being driven by acceptance of even things like we're doing today with Zoom and remote meetings and remote, I mean, is that just accelerating it?
I think it's helping acceptance, I would say. When I look at back, let's see, four years ago, when we first introduced sort of an OpEx monthly recurring revenue version, including hardware, not just software, including the hardware, the acceptance and appetite to do that was not very strong. It was kind of an uphill battle for us. Now we're having those customers in those same restaurant chains, the franchisees, contact us asking if we do that, because they're already doing that for their cash registers and a bunch of their kitchen equipment, and, you know, their Coca-Cola soda dispenser is serviced and maintained that way. So I think it is becoming much more accepted.
Well, as individuals, we're accepting it more anyway. Many years ago, it used to be Blockbuster, kind of introduced us to it, but it's, now got Netflix and everything else you do is a subscription. You just pay your monthly fee, you see it going out your bank. And individuals get used to it. So therefore it's how do you move that to your business model? But at least it's acceptable to people.
Roger, you win the prize.
The real challenge that I've seen from the IT perspective, if you've got a large hardware component that you've got to amortize, then you need to have longer agreements, like 3 years, or you have to have buyout clauses. If they want to get out of it sooner, then they have to buy out a substantial portion of the remaining contract.
And that wouldn't work. That wouldn't work with Netflix. I mean, I would never subscribe if I had to do.
And I think in the built space for this, the audience or part of the influencing circle has changed, and as we all know, and now IT is part of this decision-making process in many, many cases. And you talk to IT folks, they're used to as-a-service models.
Purchasing departments are used to paying a SaaS model fee contracts, but facility departments are not. I think that's what the distinction is. So the people who serve the facility departments need to find ways, as Tracy mentioned, transition over to a model which supports that, not only for them, but also the customer. We're saying that. We offer that.
And to Tracy's point, the CapEx model, OpEx, is really important today. And again, that really, in my opinion, wasn't looked at or considered as much as it is today 4 or 5 years ago.
Scott, you were trying to say something earlier, I think.
It's all good. I was going to give Roger a prize for referencing Blockbuster. I haven't heard of Blockbuster referenced in about a decade, I think. So
there's still one left in the U.S. somewhere. What? Yes, there's one Blockbuster. I saw it on the news, and I apologize. I cannot find. I don't often, but there's one left.
Wow.
But you think the real challenge with the SaaS models, of course, is getting to the right pricing model, right? And I've seen some really good examples. DoorDash, if you do DoorDash, DoorDash does a really good analysis of your takeout, and then they come back to you and they say, look, if you do a subscription service to my DoorDash, you will save, $10, $12 a month, based on the subscription. Now, of course, that commits me to DoorDash as opposed to Grubhub or anybody else, but okay, 10, 12 bucks a month, So the pricing one is how you price that and how you analyze the pricing, I think, is back to your point, Tracy, it's the business model as much as the technology.
If you look at it, even though a lot of this seems new, especially driven by the app world, if you will, it's really been around for a long time. Another example is my utility company. Right? To exactly what you said, was I would pay my electric bill every month. It's a CapEx, purchase. In July in Phoenix, it's ridiculously high. In January, it's, super low. So they created a little tool that analyzed my usage and said, look, if you don't change anything else in your behavior, but you go to this time of use plan and this flat payment method, you'll save about $40 a month. And we did that, and sure enough, when they layered the time of use on it, our savings actually went up even more. But even just converting from paying $700 in July and $70 in January to a flat payment, it's the same thing. It's an OpEx version of a CapEx purchase of electricity. So
and the end result is the same, is that they've locked you in, right? I mean, that's the point.
Look at the escrow payments in our mortgages, right? For taxes and insurance, it's the same kind of a thing. It's just a way to spread that and monetize it over time. And the people I've found, by the way, who make the most money in doing that are the people who finance the upfront stuff. Because really in our world, you could kind of look at 3 different business models. You've got the enablement side of it. That's the people producing hardware and the bits and pieces. You've got a bunch of companies who are flocking to the software side because it's really a lot easier. You don't have that CapEx part to finance. And then you've got those in between where you have to kind of sell the hardware along with the software. But on the first and the last models, somebody has to finance that hardware. Even if you're giving it away or you're selling it with a little bit of a markup but amortized in there, it doesn't flow all the way back to the factory, is what I'm saying. Somewhere, somebody is financing that hardware enablement piece.
So we're getting to the top of the hour. Closing comments from anyone, and we can wrap up. It's been a great show.
I'll just close out on that. So I might have made it sound negative, but it's really not. We find that the recurring revenue has provided, short of the people going out of business, obviously, but has provided a certain amount of stability here in this downturn. So with a nice mix of that, if you kind of think of it as a portfolio, we got, sales of stuff, but we've got this recurring revenue component. It really has helped smooth out, from a business standpoint, the financials for the company. So I do recommend that anyone in our delivery chain, from installers and maintenance people to manufacturers, should really look at how to build a component of that in.
Great. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I kind of gave an example of that in the chat with this Genetech. It doesn't seem, I'm always checking in on that because it seemed really interesting 5 years ago. And I think it still is, but that it's access control, and most of their business is going and installing cameras, but they do have this cloud version. And I think they're doing exactly what Tracy's saying, but having probably the mix of business models gives your operations team a chance to kind of learn how they need to change. And it could be that COVID accelerates this.
Okay, if there's no more comments, the two words that stand out to me from this show is at the beginning we were talking about the unevenness of everything, and at the end Tracy was talking about stability. So I love that. I love the stability part of it. I think we're craving for that. So on that good note, let's call this a show. Thank you all the panelists for being here. Thanks to attendees. And this will be on YouTube, hopefully sometime tonight. And the slide deck that I showed at the beginning will also be on mondaylive.org. And with that, I bid you farewell. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.